Turn off the lights. Wear your headphones. Welcome to the dark story. The first thing Mara remembers is the chalk under her fingernails. White dust that tasted like metal and old bones when she absent-mindedly licked it in the dark. The classroom light had gone out 3 minutes after the bell, swallowed by the sudden absence of the fluorescent hum she'd taken for granted all year. It wasn't just a blackout. The bulbs had gone dead in a way that made the room feel smaller, as if corners had folded inward. Someone in the back row whispered, and the whisper smelled like damp paper and the hospital corridor at night. Mara had been a substitute for 2 weeks, a quiet presence with a stack of worksheets and a lopsided coffee mug that said "World's Best Man" in chipboard letters. She taught 10th grade literature at St. Luke's High, a squat brick building whose windows had once been described in the faculty handbook as character. It was raining. The rain pattered against the glass, steady and distant, like a metronome keeping time to something deeper and older. Thunder a mile away. The students shifted. Phones lit faces in the blue of the failing day. She had the lesson planned, Poetry of the Unsaid, a contrived title meant to coax teenagers into introspection. The paperbacks on the shelf smelled of dust and lemon disinfectant. Her substitute badge sat between 2 stacks of unreturned essays like a small island. Mara's life was a map of small absolutes. Bus route, evening shift at the bookstore, calls from her mother at 6. That map did not include the hollow behind the supply closet, or the way the radiator behind the teacher's desk groaned when the room inhaled. "Power's out in half the building," said Liam from the desk nearest the window. He kept his hood up, shoulders pulled in like a child bracing against a draft. "Maintenance said it's the north wing. Could be wiring." "All right," Mara said, trying to make her voice steady enough to be authoritative, then immediately softer, because 5th period is still 5 minutes of unruly energy. "That needs coaxing, not command. We'll finish in candlelight. Group discussion. Pair up." The words felt too bright. She realized she had spoken them to the wrong faces. In the back, a girl named Priya was staring at the door. Her knuckles were white around her pen, and her lips moved, but no sound came. Past Priya, the corridor outside the classroom swallowed the light it could still find. And in that distance, someone was running. Only not running, more a shifting of weight. The unmistakable cloth-on-floorboard rhythm of someone walking with purpose. The first strange thing was small, a smear of chalk on the board where no chalk had been laid down. It began as a faint line, the ghost of a stroke, curling into a letter, M, then another, A, then R. Mara rubbed at it, and only the dust seemed to smear more precisely into a name. The word finished itself, as if a hand had passed invisibly across the surface. A laugh, somewhere behind her, didn't belong to any throat she could locate. Her students were busy with notes, with the flicker of their screens, with the way the window blurred the gray. Yet the laugh had a wetness, a padding sound like something that thinks it's being quiet and fails. "Very funny," she said without turning. "Who wrote that?" No one answered. The hum of the rain filled the pause. When she turned, the piece of chalk lying on the ledge under the board rolled a fraction, as if nudged by a breeze that smelled of old vinyl and cold metal. The classroom door was closed but not locked. The glass in its upper pane reflected a corridor lit by emergency lights, red and forgiving. Her reflection stared back at her, fatigued, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, until the reflection blinked, and she hadn't. Mara tried to call the office. Her phone said 1 bar. The voice on the other end of the line was tinny, then cut. When it came back, it had depth, as if someone had put a hand over the speaker and spoken through a throat that was not theirs. "Do not leave," the voice said, and then the static like snow on an old television. "Not yet." She told herself this was a prank. The kids were tech-savvy bored. She looked at the clock. It had stopped at 2:12. The classroom heater rattled and then fell silent. Priya's handwriting had slid across the page into an increasingly scrawled mess. From the corridor, there was the slow staccato of feet, not running, but measured and in pairs, like someone pacing off a sentence. They began to tell their stories, the way teenagers do when the adult in the room becomes fallible. Liam confessed a rumor. Years ago, a student had fallen ill and died in a neighboring class. He said it like a fact, testing the weather. He smiled at the end, and his eyes weren't smiling. Mara remembered a funeral she had never attended, a yellowing clipping from a local paper in the staff room's pile. Names matched oddly, dates overlapped. The second strange thing was the smell. It was not one smell but a collage. Lemon cleaner, wet wool, and beyond them a heatless burnt sugar that suggested someone had been cooking in the dark. It was the smell of a candle guttering out in a jar. It seeped into the classroom, pooling around desk legs and shoes, and with it came the quiet. The students started to lose their edges. Their jokes flattened and fell away like paper. Priya tapped her pen 3 times, then stopped. Her eyes were not on the teacher. They were on the window where condensation formed shapes that could almost be faces. Mara tried to keep the lesson alive. "Read the stanza again," she said. She positioned herself to be a lighthouse. Steady, central. Words must be given meaning, or else meaning will be taken. She could feel a tension like a physical thing, the way you sense heat before you see fire. The class read. Voices braided. Then at the bottom of stanza 3, the lights in the ceiling hummed, and then a low keening came from the heating ducts. It was a keening like a person mourning for something they hadn't yet lost. An object slid across the teacher's desk and stopped against her hand. It was a photograph, sepia-toned, and already creaking as if the paper were too old for its own age. On it were people who looked like a yearbook from another century. A woman in a dress, a man with a crooked tie, a child with a bowl cut. Written across the back in biro was a date. The date matched the day her father had died, even though she had no memory of that photo existing, no family album bearing it. She turned it over, and beneath the date, in a hand she did not recognize, was written one word: stay. Their faces were unreadable. They were masks lit from inside by the reflection of the window. Mara felt the first real prickle of raw fear. Not the cinematic cold, but the specific, marrow-level fear of being singled out by something that knows your name. "Okay," she said too loud. "This is getting odd. It's a drill, right? Liam, you and Priya check the hallways." She gave them permission to be brave on her behalf. They rose. The corridor swallowed them. The first twist arrived quietly. The hallway beyond the classroom was not the hallway they'd left 15 minutes prior. The orange emergency lights hummed, and the paintings on the walls, landscape prints of places that did not exist, were torn at the corners as if something had pushed through from the other side. At the far end, where lockers should have been, a cluster of student silhouettes huddled. Liam's voice came back clipped. "Miss Thomas," he said, and then the line went soft, as if underwater. On his desk lay a second photograph. In it, the faces were young and smaller, eyes sewn closed with black thread. When Liam and Priya returned, they moved like a dance they'd been taught. Too precise, rehearsed. They licked the inside of their cheeks and sawed the air with amateur theatrics. "Power's messed up," Liam said, eyes drifting. "School's old." Priya's lip trembled, and then she swallowed back a sob until the sound became a dry paper shiver. Mara began to pull at threads. She asked about the building's history, the student who died, the funeral notice. The answers warped and cracked. Every fact bent around an absence. Files the administration kept did not show up in the archives. Names were missing. The water fountain in the hall next to the staff room had never been installed. The radiator was colder than the rest of the room. People began to forget small things. Birthday dates, a teacher's first name, the color of the intercom's panel. Forgetting in St. Luke's felt contagious as a virus, an erasure that ate letters first, and then entire lengths of memory. Late into the hour, the electricity flickered, and in that flicker Mara saw, not reflection, but overlay. Images of herself in the classroom at other moments, laughing with a man whose face shifted and then smudged into smoke. Her hand stretched out toward a silhouette leaning across a desk. A small body under the table, forever secreted in shadow. Each frame shifted like film burned at the edge. When the light steadied, a child's laughter echoed from somewhere inside the walls. The second twist came harsher and more personal. During roll call, a name she did not recognize, Eliza Morrow, was read aloud by a voice on the intercom. She'd never seen the name on any roster. When Mara asked, a student in the front row, Alex, said he had been in Ms. Morrow's class last year. He described Eliza with an accuracy that stung. 12 years old, hair in a cropped bob, favorite color gray. Alex's eyes, when he said this, were wet and old. He pointed to an empty desk at the back. She sits there. She always sits there. Mara looked. An empty seat, pencil cap down, a damp spot on the desktop. When she leaned in, she smelled cough syrup and the metallic tang of blood, too old to be dangerous. She felt, impossibly, that warm hand had just slipped into hers. She ran to the office. The fluorescent lights outside the classroom felt theatrical, a stage set haphazardly restored. The principal's door was ajar. Inside, ash smudges formed the outline of a figure on the floor. There were no bodies, but there were outlines, press marks in the carpet, where something heavy had lain as if the person had been sucked down into the rug. The principal's desk phone rang, and when she answered, she said nothing for a long time, listening before whispering, "They're coming back for the ones who left." Mara's own memories betrayed her. Her father's funeral blurred to a different name. Her mother's voice on the phone asked nonsensical questions about games they had played as children. At the edge of her mind, a reel began to spool. A young girl running through the corridors, face split with anger and mud, the sudden silence of a locker door. The students began to slip into dualities. They were themselves and not themselves, present and doubled by something that mirrored them more faithfully than any reflection. In the back of the room, someone hummed a lullaby that none of them could place, but which they all somehow remembered. Lights sputtered, and in the gaps of darkness the classroom grew larger, walls that had never been there, a blackboard that stretched on to infinity, writing appearing and erasing in loops. When she tried to leave, the corridor opened into a stairwell that led down and down, further than the building should allow. Each step took Mara into a deeper cold. The walls were plastered with student drawings, childish variations of a family portrait, all the mouths stitched closed. At the bottom she found a row of lockers, each one labeled with names she recognized, Liam, Priya, Alex, and at the very end, a locker with no label, the hinges open as if it had been exhaled. Inside the locker lay a small bundle of clothes and a photograph of a girl who looked like every missing thing Mara had been feeling all day. Hair cropped, eyes the color of a rain-wet road. Where the photograph met the edge of the frame, somebody had carved Mara in the dark of the paper. Tiny letters neatly arranged. Beneath the photograph, in the shallow rust of the locker, someone had written with a fingernail on the metal, "We don't leave things behind." The climax came when the bell could not ring because there were no more chords left to strike. The whole school seemed to inhale in one long, living motion. Faces smudged, sound folded into itself. The children were safe, in the sense that their bodies were still there, but they were being rewoven, thread by thread, into a story that had once been told in St. Luke's walls and repeated until it became truth. Mara understood with the clarity of someone who has been staring into the same abyss for too long, that the school remembered things in the way it remembers names it has loved and lost. It kept them in the rooms, in the plaster, in the dust of the chalk. When a person left, the building felt incomplete and reached back. She stood in the center of the classroom and named everything she could see: books, a coffee mug, a cracked nameplate. "Mara Thomas," she said aloud. Liam Rivera, Priya Patel, Alex Shaw. Each name hung in the air like a charm. The shadows resisted, then thinned, like curtains drawn back. For a breath, she believed it would be enough. Then the photograph slid across the teacher's desk again and stopped under her palm. This time the photograph showed a future image. Mara older, hair threaded with gray, still in the classroom, hands steady on a stack of papers. Only behind her, faint in the glass of the classroom window, was the outline of a small girl looking in from the corridor. The caption scrawled beneath in a hand that might have been her own in another time, read, "When the teacher forgets her name, the student waits." Mara understood the final cruelty. The school did not take people because it hated them. It held them because it feared forgetting. It was a place that had once had a girl who left and did not come back, and now the building had learned a terrible solution. When someone leaves, bring back a face to match the whole. Names were stitches. The stitches required a hand. She placed the photograph back on the desk, trembling. "Stay," she whispered to the empty room and to herself, and the word took shape and swallowed the air like a closing door. The students blinked and sat straighter. Their edges returned, pupils focusing, shoulders relaxing. The power resumed with the timid brightness of a dawn that has been called back to life. When the bell finally rang, the students filed out with the tremor of relief. They were the same as before, except not. A few left pens behind. A paper rustled on the floor with an imprint of a small palm. Mara gathered her things. Her mug read, "World's best aunt, as always." In the corridor beneath the emergency light, someone had scrawled Mara on the plaster in a child's uneven hand. She touched it with the pad of her thumb. The paint felt warm. She started to leave and paused at the doorway. The classroom held its breath. The photograph lay face up on her desk, the small girl in it smiling like she had just received a gift. Mara picked it up, and for a second, no more, she could feel the weight of a hand slipped into hers, warm and necessary. Outside, the rain had stopped. The parking lot smoked with cooling asphalt. A crow flew overhead and croaked once, a punctuation in the washed-out light. Mara put the photograph into the bottom drawer of her desk. She locked it with a key she didn't remember pocketing. At home that evening, her mother called and asked if she was all right. Mara said yes, because the truth is cumbersome. It requires names and explanations and the business of stitching. She set the mug on the counter and went to bed with the feeling that something had been returned to its place. She thought of the word stay and of the way buildings remember. In the dark, a single sound reached her from the street, a child humming a lullaby she could not place. And for an instant, she thought she heard her own name called back to her from the place where all the lost things gather like a congregation. She slept with her hand over her heart, where someone else might one day find a groove that matched the curve of their palm. The next morning, the school called to tell her the students had all gone home fine. They had. Everything was reconciled. She opened the drawer to put the photograph back into its sleeve, and there, tucked beneath it like an afterthought, was a scrap of paper with a single sentence, in her handwriting, that she did not remember writing. "Do not leave. They do not like to be forgotten." She smiled the way someone smiles when they are trying to convince themselves of their own courage. Then, before she could change her mind, she replaced the scrap, locked the drawer, and walked away. At the door, she paused and looked back. The classroom window caught her reflection and held it. In the glass, behind her, a little figure stood in the corridor and raised a small pale hand in a wave. Mara did not wave back. She did not need to. The figure smiled, and the smile was both an invitation and a promise. The bell rang again, and somewhere behind the walls, something that had been waiting, exhaled with satisfaction. By the time Lena heard her own name whisper out of the library stacks, she already knew she was alone with something that had been waiting for her longer than she had lived. The sound was so soft it might have been the page turning of a book, but it carried a human warmth that made the back of her neck tighten. In the dim evening light, the school library looked less like a room and more like a mouth, shelves for teeth, windows for gums, the silence between them deep enough to swallow a prayer. Lena stood behind the circulation desk with a pile of returned books and a cold ache in her chest, listening to the old buildings settle around her. Somewhere in the dark, a metal shelf gave a slow, deliberate creak, as if someone had touched it and paused to listen back. Lena was a senior at St. Aurelia's School, the kind of place people praised for discipline and tradition, while never asking what those words cost the students inside it. She stayed after hours because her mother worked double shifts, and because the library was the only place that felt quieter than her own apartment. Her little brother Ben had died 6 months earlier, and the world had not become more peaceful since then. It had simply become more hollow. Books helped with that. Books had rules, endings. The library smelled like dust, old glue, and the faint sweetness of paper gone brown with age. It was a smell Lena had come to trust. That night, even the smell had changed. Beneath the paper and polish was something damp and sour, like wet wool left in a closed room. She checked the clock. 6:41. The rain had started outside, tapping the high windows in a nervous rhythm. She was just about to lock the front doors when the intercom clicked once, then twice. Lena. Her hand froze on the key. Not exactly. Same pitch, same hesitation at the end of the name, but wrong in a way she could feel before she could explain. The voice came again, softer this time, from somewhere between the stacks. Lena, come here. She should have left. Every rational instinct in her body screamed that. But the library had one weakness. It knew her grief, and grief is a door that never fully closes. She stepped away from the desk, shoes whispering over the linoleum, and followed the sound past the fiction section, where the shelves threw long black shadows that seemed to lean out of the corners. As she passed the reading table, she saw a book lying open on its own. It was a children's story, one she remembered from years ago. On the page was a penciled note in Ben's handwriting. Don't let it finish the story. Lena's breath caught so hard it hurt. The note was impossible. Ben had died before he learned to write like that, before the letters grew neat and slanted. Her fingers shook as she touched the page, and the paper was warm. Not room temperature, not sun-warmed, but body-warm. A sound came from the aisle beside her, a page turning, then another. She moved slowly, every muscle tight. At the end of the aisle, half hidden behind a shelf of history books, stood a small boy in a school uniform. His face was obscured by shadow, but she knew the shape of him instantly. Her throat closed. Ben? The boy tilted his head. You're late. The voice was his, but flatter, hollowed out like a copied recording played too many times. Lena stumbled backward. Her heel struck something hard. She looked down and found a second book at her feet. It was the library's old register, the spine cracked, the cover warped by age. Open to a page near the back, it contained rows of names written in different hands. Some were crossed out, some were circled, some had dates beside them. At the bottom of the page in fresh black ink, she saw her own name. Below it was one word: returned. The first twist hit her like ice water. She remembered then with awful clarity that 3 days earlier she had signed out an old poetry collection from the restricted shelf. The librarian had warned her not to take it home. She had laughed and said she only wanted something to read, but she had not brought it back. She had left it under her bed, and every night since, she had heard faint rustling from the drawer where she kept it. Pages shifting, a breath between lines. Now she understood those sounds had not stayed in the bedroom. They had followed her here. The boy in the aisle raised one hand and pointed toward the back room. Miss Clark says, you have to come. Miss Clark had been the library's head librarian for 30 years, an old woman with white hair pinned tight and eyes like polished stones. She had been sick all week and absent from school. Lena's skin prickled. Where is she? The boy didn't answer. The lights overhead flickered once, and in that brief flash the aisle was empty. Not just empty, wider than before, longer than the library should allow. The shelves seemed to stretch away into impossible darkness. Then the lights steadied, and the boy was back, now farther down the aisle, as if he had never moved at all. The library door slammed somewhere behind her. Lena spun. The front entrance had vanished behind a wall of shelves that had not been there before. Panic rose sharp in her throat. She ran toward the circulation desk, but the desk was gone too. In its place stood a long wooden table, covered in library cards, each one bearing a photograph of a student, with their eyes scratched out. On the wall above it, under the exit sign, someone had written in red pen, "The book keeps what you leave inside it." The second twist came with the sound of a woman crying. It was coming from the restricted room. Lena pushed open the door and found Miss Clark sitting in the center of the floor, thin hands gripping a black hardcover book chained to the leg of a chair. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were dry and fever-bright. "You shouldn't have opened it," she whispered. Opened what? The last page. The book in front of her was the poetry collection Lena had borrowed. Its pages were fanned open, but the words on them were not printed text. They were notes in different handwriting, desperate and overlapping, as if several people had tried to explain the same nightmare before being taken inside it. Lena knelt beside the old woman and saw in the margins sketches of shelves, stairwells, a boy with no face, and a final line written so hard the paper had torn. "It learns the shape of your loss." Miss Clark grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "It doesn't want your body," she said. "It wants the thing you're missing. That's how it keeps the room full." A thud sounded above them. Then another. Books falling, one by one, from shelves that should have been too high to reach. Lena thought of Ben, thought of the hospital smell, the tiny hand going cold in hers, the terrible silence after the machine stopped. The room seemed to tilt. What did I leave in it? Miss Clark's mouth trembled. "Your brother." Before Lena could answer, the room burst with a sound like 1,000 pages ripping at once. The chained book snapped open by itself. Black ink flooded the margins, crawling across the floor in branching veins. From the darkness at the edge of the room came footsteps, small, wet, and patient. Ben appeared in the doorway, but not as a child. He was taller now, too thin, his face stretched with a sadness too old for him. Around his neck hung the library card of a dead student. He looked at Lena with a grief that did not belong to the living. "I waited," he said, and then she understood the final horror. The library had not taken Ben from her when he died. It had taken the version of him she carried inside her. The one who still laughed, still asked for stories, still came home with rain in his hair. Grief had been feeding him here, line by line, page by page, until he had become part of the place itself. The shelves began to shift again, closing in like walls. Miss Clark screamed for her to run, but there was nowhere to run to. The door was gone. The windows were black mirrors. Ben stepped closer, and every book in the room began whispering at once in the voices of the missing. Lena reached for him, crying now, but her hand passed through cold air. When the librarians found the room the next morning, the chain was still intact, the poetry book still open, and Miss Clark was dead at the base of the chair with a look of terror frozen on her face. Lena was gone. Only one thing had changed on the register beside the door. Under her name in fresh ink, someone had written, "Due back tomorrow." The first time Aaron noticed the bus was empty. It was already moving. Not empty in the ordinary sense. There were children in the seats, backpacks on laps, rainwater dripping from their shoes. But empty in the way a grave is empty after the dirt settles, in the way a face is empty when the eyes are open, but no one is home behind them. The driver never turned around. He kept both hands locked on the wheel, knuckles pale in the glow of the dashboard, while the yellow school bus groaned through the dark country road like something old and wounded trying not to die before it reached its destination. Aaron sat near the back, his hoodie damp with rain, his lunchbox cold against his knees. He had missed the first bus after staying late to help his little sister Mira find her missing arithmetic book. By the time he reached the stop, the second bus was waiting with its door open and the driver nodding once, as if he had been expected all along. There was something wrong in the air the moment Aaron stepped inside. The smell was not diesel and wet rubber, but something sweeter and faintly rotten, like flowers left too long in a closed room. The other children stared forward without blinking. No one spoke. Even the usual creaks and coughs of a school bus seemed to have been removed, leaving only the rain ticking against the windows and the engine's low, patient hum. "Seatbelt," the driver said. His voice was thin and dry, as if it had passed through a mouth full of dust. Aaron glanced around for an empty seat and noticed every pair of eyes avoiding his. Across the aisle, a girl with braided hair sat with her hands folded so tightly her fingers had gone white. She looked about 10, maybe younger, and she was crying silently, tears slipping down her cheeks without a sound. Aaron wanted to ask her what was wrong, but when he opened his mouth, the bus lurched so sharply that his shoulder struck the window. The road outside had changed. He had taken this bus for 3 years. The straight stretch past the tea stall, the bend by the banyan tree, the ditch with the broken signboard. But now the road was narrower, blacker, and lined with trees that leaned inward like spectators. There were no houses, no streetlights, no other vehicles. only fog pressing against the glass and the occasional flash of something pale between the trunks. Too fast to be a person, too tall to be an animal. Aaron turned to the front and saw the rearview mirror. The driver had no face. Not a mask, not darkness. No face at all. Just smooth skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, stretched tight and blank like wax. Aaron froze so hard, he forgot to breathe. In the mirror, the faceless thing kept staring forward, one hand steady on the wheel, the other tapping softly against the metal in a rhythm that seemed almost familiar. A soft thump came from the roof, then another, then several in quick succession, like fingers walking across metal. The children all lowered their heads at once. Aaron felt the first spark of terror turn into something deeper and colder. He looked at the girl beside him and whispered, "What is this?" She didn't answer. Instead, she lifted her hand and pointed to the seat in front of her. Scratched into the plastic with jagged, frantic lines were the words, "Do not let it hear your name." The bus began to smell worse. Wet earth, rust, old blood. Aaron dug his fingernails into the edge of the seat and forced himself not to call out for Mira, not to say her name, not to ask where his sister was. His mind shoved her image at him anyway. Small hands, school ribbons, the missing arithmetic book under her arm. He tried to remember whether she had boarded the bus with him. He could not. The memory was there and not there, like a dream that fades the moment you wake. A shape slammed against the outside window. Aaron flinched and saw a face pressed to the glass, distorted by rain and motion. It was pale, child-sized, with black water streaming from its eyes. Its mouth opened too wide, and Aaron heard a voice through the glass, not from the face, but from inside his own head. "Don't let him count us." The bus shook violently. Several children began to sob, but still they did not make sound. Their mouths opened and closed as if the air had been stolen from them. Aaron looked down and realized his own reflection. In the window was delayed by a second, then two, then vanished altogether. He was no longer seeing himself. He was seeing a seat where he sat, and on that seat was a boy with his head bowed, hands folded, skin gray as chalk. The second twist hit when the driver finally spoke again. "We are almost at your stop," he said. Aaron stared at the blank mirror. "I didn't tell you where I live." The faceless head tilted slightly. "You did," it said, "when you were smaller." The bus slowed. Outside the windows, the trees gave way to a field of dead grass and a rusted gate standing alone in the fog. Beyond it was a row of houses, but they were all wrong, crooked, leaning too far, windows dark and watching. One of the houses had Aaron's front door. His heart thudded painfully. "No," he whispered. The girl beside him finally spoke, and when she did, her voice sounded older than her face. "If you get off, you'll forget her." Aaron turned to her. "Forget who?" She looked at him with terrible pity. "Your sister." The bus doors hissed open. Cold air poured in, carrying the smell of wet dirt and something burned beneath it. Aaron saw a figure standing at the bottom step, a little girl in a school uniform, her hair tied with Mira's blue ribbon. Relief hit him so hard it nearly made him cry. Mira. The bus around him changed instantly. The children vanished. The seats became empty, rows of cracked vinyl stretching into darkness. The driver was still there, faceless and motionless, but now the mirror showed a different image. Not the road, but Aaron's own house, its windows black, its front door hanging open. The little girl outside lifted her face. It was not Mira's. It was his own, younger by years, eyes wide with panic and mouth stained with dirt. The blue ribbon in her hair was tied around a finger that had been severed clean at the joint. Aaron stumbled backward, choking on the realization. The bus had not been carrying children. It had been carrying the missing versions of them, the pieces people lost and never noticed until years later, the memories and names and voices that slipped away one by one. He remembered then, with brutal clarity, that Mira had not been looking for her arithmetic book. She had been looking for him. A scream rose inside his chest as the driver leaned closer, and though there was no mouth, Aaron heard the grin in its voice. "Your stop," it whispered. The doors opened wider, and outside, waiting in the fog, stood Mira, older now, crying, holding a lantern that lit only herself. While behind her, in the dark glass of the house, Aaron saw a boy no one had ever missed raise his hand and wave from the other side.